The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning while the dew still clung to the magnolias. Samuel watched from the stable window as Master Whitmore's face turned the color of fresh ash, his coffee cup slipping from nerveless fingers to shatter on the veranda stones. The old man's eyes found Samuel across the yard, and in that moment, both men knew everything had changed forever. 3 months earlier, Samuel had been breaking a new mare when Charlotte Whitmore appeared at the stable door. Her blue dress caught the afternoon light like water, and her presence made the horses nervous in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She'd been watching him for weeks, he knew, though proper Southern ladies weren't supposed to notice men like him at all. Charlotte stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the lavender water she dabbed behind her ears each morning. "I know you read because I've seen you with Mother's books in the library after midnight. I've watched you trace the words with your fingers, moving your lips to sound them out." Her confession hung between them like a blade. Samuel's hands stilled on the mare's bridle. One word to her father would mean 40 lashes, or worse, but Charlotte wasn't there to threaten him. She was there because she'd inherited her mother's dangerous sympathies, and something else too, a loneliness that matched his own. "What do you want from me, Miss Charlotte?" The question came out rougher than intended. 23 years of bondage had taught him that white folks always wanted something, and the pretty ones were often the most dangerous. She moved closer still, until her skirts brushed the hay at his feet. "I want you to teach me what freedom feels like," she whispered, "because I'm as much a prisoner in that house as you are in these quarters, just with prettier chains." The mare snorted and stamped, sensing the tension that crackled between them. Samuel knew he should walk away, knew that nothing good could come from this moment. But Charlotte's eyes held a desperation he recognized, the same wild need that kept him awake at night, planning impossible escapes. "Your father would kill me," he said simply. It wasn't a refusal, just a statement of fact. Master Whitmore had already sold 2 field hands for merely looking at Charlotte too long during last summer's harvest celebration. Charlotte's laugh was bitter as old medicine. "My father plans to marry me to Colonel Hayes next month. The man is 58 years old and has buried 2 wives already. So you see, we're both scheduled for death, just by different means." That night, Samuel found her in the library, surrounded by maps and documents. She'd been crying, her face streaked with the kind of tears that came from decision rather than sorrow. On the desk before her lay her mother's journal, open to a page dated 15 years prior. "She loved someone too," Charlotte said, without looking up. "A freeman who worked the neighboring plantation. She wrote about him every day until father found out and had him hanged from the oak tree you can see from your quarters." Samuel's blood chilled. He'd always wondered about the rope marks on that old tree, too high for any practical purpose. "Miss Charlotte, you need to go back to your room. This ain't safe for either of us." But she was already standing, already moving toward him with purpose in every step. "I have a proposition," she said. "One that could free us both, if you're brave enough to take it." The plan she outlined was audacious in its simplicity. Charlotte had access to her father's documents, including the papers that proved ownership of his property, human and otherwise. She could forge a letter of manumission, but it would need to be witnessed and filed with the county clerk. The only way to make it legitimate was to create circumstances where her father would want Samuel gone. "Make him hate you so much he'll sign anything to be rid of you," she said. "But first, we need him to believe you're invaluable, irreplaceable. Then we take that away." Over the following weeks, Samuel became Master Whitmore's most trusted servant. He saved the man's prize stallion from colic, negotiated a better price for the tobacco crop, and even prevented a revolt among the field hands by warning of it early. Whitmore began to rely on him, even spoke of purchasing Samuel's wife and children from the Hendricks plantation to keep him content. But Samuel had no wife, no children. That was another part of Charlotte's plan. She'd invented them, complete with forged letters from the fictional Mrs. Samuel, to make him seem stable, settled, less likely to run. It worked too well. Master Whitmore started speaking of Samuel almost fondly, the way a man might speak of a particularly clever dog. Meanwhile, Charlotte played her own part to perfection. She attended teas with Colonel Hayes, smiled at his stories of military conquest, and let him pull at her hand during evening walks. Her father glowed with satisfaction, already counting the money and status this union would bring. The first crack in the facade came when Samuel deliberately let the prize stallion escape. The horse destroyed half the tobacco seedlings before they caught him, and Whitmore's rage was incandescent. But Charlotte intervened, suggesting that Samuel had been distracted by worry for his fictional family, and perhaps bringing them to the plantation would restore his focus. "You're too soft, just like your mother Whitmore, Spot." But he sent a letter to Hendricks anyway. When the reply came back that no such family existed, the old man's suspicion ignited like dry kindling. That night, he confronted Samuel in the stables with a whip in one hand and a pistol in the other. "You've been lying to me, boy." Question is, about what exactly? The tip of the whip traced lazy circles in the dirt, a promise of pain to come. Samuel kept his eyes down, playing the part of the terrified slave, even as his mind raced. "Master, I only wanted to seem valuable to you. A man with family seems more trustworthy," I thought. The whip cracked across his shoulders before he could finish. "Trustworthy? You think I'm fool enough to trust any of you?" Another strike, this one drawing blood through his thin shirt. "What else have you lied about?" Charlotte's scream from the doorway stopped the third blow. She stood there in her nightgown, hair loose and wild, looking every inch the hysteric Southern belle. "Father, stop. You're killing him." Whitmore turned on his daughter with eyes like hot coals. "Get back to the house, girl. This doesn't concern you." But Charlotte was already running forward, throwing herself between Samuel and the whip. What happened next would be debated in whispers throughout the county for years to come. Some said she tripped, others that Samuel pulled her against him. But the result was unmistakable: Charlotte Whitmore in the arms of a slave, her pale fingers clutched in his dark ones. The pistol in Whitmore's hand shook as he aimed it at Samuel's head. "Let her go, or I'll paint these walls with your brains." Charlotte turned in Samuel's arms, facing her father with defiance burning in her eyes. "I won't let you kill him. I won't let you destroy the only good thing in this poisoned place." The words hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Whitmore's face went through a series of transformations: confusion, understanding, and finally, a rage so pure it seemed to stop time itself. "You," he whispered, the word like a curse. "You've touched her. My daughter, my pure, innocent daughter." Samuel tried to push Charlotte away, knowing what came next, but she clung to him with surprising strength. "He's done nothing I didn't ask for," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Nothing I didn't beg for." The lie was perfectly crafted, designed to wound her father in the place that would hurt Mosiah's pride. Whitmore's scream of rage brought servants running from all corners of the plantation, white and black alike, to witness the tableau in the stable. "I'll see you hanged." Whitmore snarled at Samuel, hanged and burned and scattered to the winds. But Charlotte wasn't finished. She pulled a document from her nightgown, one she'd hidden there for just this moment. "Then you'll have to explain this to Colonel Hayes and all of Virginia society." It was a certificate of marriage, dated 3 weeks prior, with what appeared to be the signature of a traveling preacher. The forgery was excellent, Charlotte's finest work. She'd even aged the paper with tea and smoke to make it look authentic. Whitmore snatched it from her hands, reading it once, twice, 3 times, as if the words might change. "This is impossible. Illegal. No preacher would." "Reverend Thompson from the Methodist circuit," Charlotte said calmly. "He believed in Mother's cause. He married us in secret, knowing full well the consequences. The mentioned preacher had conveniently died of cholera 2 weeks ago, a fact Charlotte had confirmed before putting his name on the document. There was no one to dispute her claim. Whitmore's hands trembled as he lowered the pistol. Around them, the gathered crowd murmured and gasped. A white woman married to a slavite was unthinkable, impossible. Yet here was proof in black and white. "You've destroyed us," Whitmore sighed, his voice hollow as an empty grave. "Destroyed everything I've built, everything your mother and I created." Charlotte's smile was sharp as winter frost. Mother would have approved. She wrote about it in her journal, about how love recognizes no boundaries of color or station. "Would you like me to share those passages with the county newspaper?" The threat was clear. Whitmore's reputation, his standing, his entire world, balanced on the edge of a knife. He could expose the marriage as false, but the investigation would destroy them regardless. Or he could find another way. "What do you want?" The question came out, broken, Defeated, Charlotte produced another document. This one, a deed of manumission. Sign this, give Samuel his freedom, and we'll leave Virginia tonight. You can tell everyone I died of fever, that I'm buried in the family plot. No one need know the truth. Whitmore's laugh was like breaking glass. You think it's that simple? You think I can just sign a paper and make this disappear? But even as he spoke, his hand was reaching for the pen. The alternative scandal, ruin, social death was worse than losing a daughter. In the antebellum South, reputation was currency, and Charlotte had just robbed him of his entire fortune. The signature, when it came, was shaky, but legal. Samuel felt the weight of chains he'd worn for 23 years suddenly lift. Though he knew the physical freedom meant little without safety, they would have to run far and fast to escape the inevitable pursuit. Charlotte kissed her father's cheek, a gesture so tender it made the old man flinch. "I know you'll send men after us," she whispered. "But remember, I have Mother's journal. Every secret, every indiscretion, every piece of evidence that would destroy not just you, but half the prominent families." In Virginia, it was the final card in her hand, and she played it perfectly. Whitmore aged 10 years in that moment, understanding that his daughter had orchestrated this entire performance from the beginning. They left that very hour, taking nothing but the clothes on their backs and a small bag of coins Charlotte had hidden weeks ago. As their wagon disappeared into the darkness, Whitmore stood on the veranda, still holding the forged marriage certificate. His overseer approached cautiously. "Should I organize a hunting party, sir?" Whitmore was quiet for a long moment, then slowly tore the certificate into pieces, letting them float away on the wind. "My daughter had died of scarlet fever tonight." He sighed flatly. Have the servants prepare the parlor for mourning. The lie would become truth within days. A funeral with an empty coffin, neighbors offering condolences, Colonel Hayes sending white roses for the grave. But at night, Whitmore would stand at Charlotte's window, staring at the road that had taken her away. 3 states north, Samuel and Charlotte stopped running long enough to breathe. They'd made it to Pennsylvania, where their fictional marriage could become real if they chose. But something had changed between them during the flight. A recognition that their partnership had been built on mutual desperation rather than love. "We don't have to continue this charade," Samuel said as they stood outside a boarding house in Philadelphia. "You're free of your father, and I'm free of chains. We can part ways here." Charlotte studied him in the gaslight, seeing him truly for perhaps the first time not as a means to escape, but as a man who'd risked everything on her wild plan. "And what would you do with your freedom?" Samuel thought of all the nights he'd dreamed of this moment, and how different it was from his imagination. "I'd go west. California, maybe, where the gold rush has made men forget about color, at least when it comes to money." Charlotte nodded slowly. "And I'll go north to Boston. I have Mother's relatives there who share her sympathies. They'll take me in, help me start over." They stood there in the Philadelphia street, 2 people who'd destroyed an entire world to gain their freedom, now faced with the terrifying prospect of actually living it. "I won't forget what you did," Samuel said finally. "You gave up everything." Charlotte cut him off with a raised hand. "I gave up nothing that wasn't already a prison. You're the one who risked the noose." They parted the next morning, Charlotte boarding a train for Boston while Samuel joined a wagon train heading west. Neither looked back, though both carried the weight of what they'd done like stones in their chests. The news of Charlotte's death reached them separately weeks later. Samuel read it in a California newspaper, a small notice about the tragic loss of Virginia Belle Charlotte Whitmore to scarlet fever. Charlotte saw it in a Boston Society page, accompanied by speculation about her father's sudden withdrawal from public life. But there was another piece of news that neither of them expected. Master Whitmore had freed all his slaves the day after Charlotte's funeral, then sold the plantation for a fraction of its value. He'd disappeared somewhere into the Western Territories, leaving behind only debts and confused creditors. Some said grief had driven him mad. Others whispered about curses and divine justice. But Charlotte, reading the news in her small Boston apartment, understood the truth. Her father had finally read her mother's journal, the real one she'd left in his study. He'd learned about the child his wife had lost, the one fathered by the freeman he'd hanged. He'd learned that Charlotte wasn't his daughter at all. The revelation had destroyed him more thoroughly than any scandal could have. Everything he'd built, everything he'd believed, had been founded on a lie. His wife had loved another, had carried that love literally inside her, had raised the child as Whitmore's own. Charlotte touched the locket at her throat, the one that held a miniature of her mother and, hidden behind it, a sketch of a man she'd never met, but whose eyes she saw in the mirror every morning. Her real father, the freeman who'd loved unwisely and died for it. She thought of Samuel, somewhere in California, panning for gold, or building something new with his freed hands. She wondered if he ever thought of her, of those strange months when they'd played at love to win their freedom. Years later, she would marry a Boston abolitionist and bear 3 children who would never know the truth of their heritage. Samuel would strike silver in Nevada and become wealthy enough to buy respectability, though he never married, never quite trusting love after what he'd seen it do. The Whitmore plantation would stand empty for 20 years before burning to the ground in what investigators called a lightning strike. But locals swore they'd seen figures in the flames, a woman in a blue dress and a man with skin dark as night, dancing together while the big house collapsed into ash and memory. The oak tree with the rope marks remained standing until well into the next century, when civil rights workers cut it down and used the wood to build a schoolhouse. On the cornerstone, they carved a quote from an old journal found in the ruins of the plantation library. "Love recognizes no boundaries save those we build ourselves, and even those are meant to fall." No one knew who'd written those words. The wife of a plantation owner, or her daughter who'd loved a slave. Or perhaps it was written by someone else entirely. Someone whose story was never told because history belongs to those who survived to write it. In Boston, an old woman would die peacefully in her bed, surrounded by grandchildren who called her Granny Charlotte. In California, an old man would pass while watching the sunset from his ranch, leaving his fortune to a school for freed slaves' children. The Whitmore name disappeared from Virginia society, scrubbed clean as if it had never existed. But on certain summer nights, when the air hung thick with honeysuckle and history, locals claimed you could still hear the sound of chains breaking, not with violence, but with something far more dangerous. The sound of people choosing love over law, freedom over family, truth over tradition. The sound of a world ending and another beginning, all because a young woman decided her chains, though prettier, were still chains, and a young man decided that freedom was worth any price, even the heart of his master's daughter.